Hello and welcome to the Mushroom Murder Trial podcast. My name is Lisa and we have a big surprise for you today. I have Duncan McNab, who is one of the country's most eminent true crime writers, and he's doing a book on Erin Patterson. Hello, Duncan. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, Lisa, and thanks for the invite.
We are very happy to have you here today. And I wanted to start off by asking you, when did you first hear about the Erin Patterson case?
I first saw some bizarre headlines in Melbourne, and they were really strange. Probably that literally a couple of days after the first week of August, where we started hearing about this strange, possibly mass poisoning event in a town called Leongatha, which I have to admit, Leongatha, I'd never heard of it. And I hadn't heard of either, which is about, 13, 14 clicks up the road. Neither town I'd heard of. I knew about Morwell and Terralgan in East Gippsland, but never these two places. So I had a quick look up on Dr. Google and I thought, this is strange. You don't hear about these group poisonings in places like Australia. So it hooked me day one just to work out why. Then you hear the police are involved, as they should be in these cases. So I started watching the bits and pieces of the investigation unfold. Quite astounding stuff. And what struck me very early on was how much of the world media were also looking at it. And it might be because, I suppose, the location, one thing, rural Australia, towns we hadn't heard of here, but also they were poisoned because of a Beef Wellington. And that's one of those bizarre hooks you get in crime. You think, poisoned by a Beef Wellington? How the hell did that happen? My first thought goes back to Gordon Ramsay and his signature dish. So
He must be very angry.
and then, yes, or Gordon Ramsay, he might, the publicity might not be doing him any harm either. It's bizarre. I read a piece in, I think it was Australian, shortly afterwards, October, November, whatever it was, 2023, which they had indicated there had been an upswing in Beef Wellington purchases. So go figure. And that's how I got hooked on the case. Then I started looking at it and thinking to myself, this has a very, very, very nasty smell about it. So accident, deliberate. And then I saw that bizarre doorstop interview with Erin Patterson, and that made my fairly cynical mind race a bit harder. And that was the afternoon she was doorstop getting out of a car in Gibson Street, Leongatha. Stepped out of the car and decided to talk to the journalists. And that was in itself quite unusual. Followed, as I recall, by her statement, which was leaked to the ABC, as I recall. So you're starting to scratch your head. I've been around a lot of years. I've investigated murders myself. I've defended quite a few people in another life as well. And God knows I've written about them and make TV about them. So you start thinking to yourself, this has a particularly interesting flavour to it. So let's watch it and see where it ends up.
So your spidey senses were up, considering you've been a former detective and been around a lot of high-profile cases.
Yeah, it was ticking a lot of boxes. And I'm starting to think, well, is it a horrible accident that, bottom line, is three people died, one person almost died, and Erin Patterson, the chef who was dishing up the Beef Wellingtons, didn't have any demonstrable problems. She said she had a few issues, but certainly nothing of the perilous condition that the four people found themselves in. So, yeah, and in the back of my mind, whenever you look at an incident like this, and coppers particularly have this habit, you look at it and think, well, when you look at murder, for example, it's always someone close to you, or invariably someone close to you. So the stats suggest something or other. So yeah, every sense is thinking it doesn't work. So I was bloody intrigued, as was everybody else. I have to say, this is the most extraordinarily high-profile case in in a generation, probably not since Lindy Chamberlain, maybe.
Yeah, it's been a big one.
And it grabbed global attention. I'm on the road a lot, and I'm seeing it. Case mentions in the UK. I was in Canada at Christmas 2023 talking to my butcher, and he was talking about it. So,
wow,
it's troubled the world. Yeah, it's in butcher in Toronto. Go figure.
So these people who
not Toronto.
So the people who listen to this podcast, primarily Australia, but then the UK and the US, and I actually think Beef Wellington makes it a very English story.
Yeah, it does. And it's in part, I find a lot with crime, this may sound a bit bizarre, but a story with a picture that you can get in your mind always tends to hook people harder. So in Sydney, for example, we've got the disappearance of Juanita Nielsen, murdered 50 years ago. It's a case you'll never think. You watch once you see Juanita's hairstyle, you can't forget it. It's a simple visual cue. And in the case of this, we've got the Beef Wellington, and you just can't dislodge that from your mind. It's just one of these strange, quirky things that hooks our memories.
Do you think she had a motive?
That's the burning question for everyone, I think, and not an ingredient, as we know, of the crime to prove it. But I actually don't know. Some people, and this is a bizarre thing about crime, we'd like to think that everyone has a reason they do something, particularly something as horrific as trying to murder 4 people. But sometimes it's just something they do. It's an inconvenience or something they look upon murder. I think I once made a comment, which is I don't think is too unreasonable, that Roger Rogerson probably murdered or was involved in the murder of up to 12 people or so. That Roger killing somebody had this a little bit more consideration than how do you want your steak cooked. It just doesn't interest them. For us, it's horrific. But for people like Erin Patterson, I suspect it's just, there was a reason for it, but it's not this dark motive and she's been brewing away for a while. It's just a decision she's made. I don't know. We may find out a little bit more when sentencing comes up because it is highly likely there'll be a lot of psychiatric reports added or psychologist reports, and we might get some more insight there. But at the present moment, I just don't know, and I can't see a reason for it. Let me put it that way. I mean, we know that in the Erin Patterson case, that she and her husband had an amicable relationship, even though estranged, and that soured in December 2022, or there November, December 2022. But a soured domestic relationship and disputes over child support doesn't really come close to why you would then try and kill 4 people.
Yes, that is very true. I think it's revenge.
Yeah, it's quite possible. She might be feeling disenfranchised. The family are not as warm as they were, blah, blah, blah. And in her mind, and this is where I go back to the Rogerson analogy, well, it's, bug 'em. Because the jury had now come back and they're satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that on the 29th of July, when she served 4 people Beef Wellingtons, that she intended to kill them. That's what the jury have found. That's the charge. I can't even come to grips with how a person could think that. But they
Doesn't
think
like
differently than how you and
round.
I and the rest of you. Yeah, and they again, it didn't happen accidentally. And the premise of her defense case was just a horrible accident. But that didn't convince the jury, and in part that's probably because of the litany of lies she told, and she was caught out. So for someone who's planned the case, and she has done quite a bit of planning, she's made some fundamental blunders in that planning as well, and that's where she's come unstuck.
Okay, then.
I
So
can
do you
understand.
Sorry, I'm sorry, Duncan. I just was going to say, do you think her testifying helped or made it worse? Or she had no choice? She had to get up there.
The choice is ultimately hers. There is, and I've chatted to a couple of lawyer mates who tell me that it is becoming not common, but it is becoming more frequent that the accused person will hop in the witness box and tell their story. And his view is it's because the jurors actually like to see them, assess them for themselves, and hear from them, which I think that's compelling. In Erin's case, I don't. She had a choice, but I suppose her not hopping into the witness box meant the jury would always be scratching their head because the story would be very incomplete. And I think the viewers of Erin thought, and Erin was, to give it's a point to make here, I thought Erin was a very competent witness. She didn't get upset, very measured. She cried when appropriate, all that sort of stuff. It was a very measured performance, but she was a very good witness. The problem was she had to explain a whole shitload of lies, and that was where the problem came in. But as a witness, and I've seen lots of witnesses, she's pretty bloody good.
Okay, because to me, I want to know why she wore the white pants when she had the bush poo. That's the one question that was never answered.
You are not the only one. I've had a lot of friends of mine of saying, she was wearing the white pants. It's a bloody good observational point. If you're you've got some issues, like I'll sit in the car because it's like sitting on cork, I think was one of the reasons as well. Another one. It doesn't make sense. Well, the night that she was first became ill early in the early evening, she had options. She could have got Simon to take the kids home. No, there are plenty of options, but you're right. This is where the story starts to fall apart because when you test her story, when you look at it objectively, her story just doesn't really work. And that's where for someone as clever as she is, and she's very bright, and someone who'd done so much planning, and someone who'd observed through her fascination for true crime, she hadn't learned the basics. She might have actually been a little bit better if she'd said, yeah, it was a horrible accident from the outset. But no, instead we had this tissue of lies, the D. And the cops, and the job the cops do, and they did this from day one, is that they give her the option to tell her story, and they know it's wrong. So the story of the dehydrator is a perfect example. When she sat down that afternoon and said, I don't know anything about a dehydrator, and passed off the manual they'd found as something from the past, she didn't know that the cops actually had her by that stage. They knew she was lying to her. So they gave her a shovel and said, here, off you go. And that's how cops work. So while she's very clever, I don't think she had quite come to grips with how to construct her case as solidly as she should have. She made lots of mistakes.
But your book, it is actually about more than the crime. It's about the community, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of characters. When you do a crime story, there are a lot of characters. You just do the A to B thing. But I think, you've got to look at Erin Patterson. You've got to look at her environment, her history, the town she was living in, or the town she was living in, because very early on, everyone was focusing on Leongatha, and that's certainly where people were poisoned. But all the luncheon guests were from very different town.
Yep.
And then we had this, the other thing that's always curious is she wanted to be tried by her locals, and she was tried in Morwell, which is not really local.
No.
It's the closest court, big enough, sure, but it's a very different demographic. And you've been down that part of the world. You walk through Corrigan or Leongatha, very different to poor old hardworking Morwell, which I think is a town that I actually quite like. Morwell, friendly people, but really hardworking, and place that's had a lot of kicks in the guts over the years, whereas the other two places are a little bit more upmarket, wineries are close to town and all that sort of jazz. So as opposed to dairy towns are quite affluent. You just look at the prices in the pub for a steak, make your eyes water. But whereas Morwell is just a really salt of the earth, hardworking town. We dig coal, we generate electricity. So it's not the pretty rolling countryside that you have when you go to, for example, to Corrigan, which is quite a beautiful part of the world. Brands backing new wineries popping up everywhere, and weekend tourists, and quite a few blokes walking around the main street with man buns, which is something you didn't always find in regional Australia. So yeah, they're very different towns. So they're part of the story. And
For sure.
And I suppose don't forget either that she didn't grow up out there. She's not a country girl. She grew up in Melbourne's nice leafy southeastern suburbs. That's where she lived all her childhood. That's where she grew up, and she in fact had a villa home. I think they called it in Melbourne, sort of like a little townhouse type thing, which she only sold, I think, from memory, in December of last year, or year before last. I'm sorry. So she'd owned that for a while as well. She bought it with part of her inheritances as a sort of city pad. So she's not a country girl.
And that was the alleged site of where she originally had the Tupperware and the stinky mushrooms, according to Erin. Was that Mount Waverley or Glen Waverley? Yeah.
I always get the two horribly confused, and I did get lost driving around there a few times. Yes, Mount Waverley, Glen Waverley, they're not terribly far apart, and Clayton, all pretty close to where she grew up too, by the way. But yeah, that's where she first experimented, I think, with a pasta dish back allegedly in April 2023. And didn't like the smell of them, so she put them in the Tupperware container and took it back to Leongatha with her. Fair enough. But, and that's where a lot of the investigation, a lot of money's been spent on investigating some of the lies she told. And that's, I think, from memory, I think they visited about 14 separate Asian grocers, he said off the top of his head, in that local area to see if they could find something. It was just all fake.
Yeah, and they probably had a team of Department of Health people behind that as well. And then you had all the people in the hospital trying to find out what the cause was.
Yeah, it's the logistics involved in making sure that this wasn't a public health risk. Day one, what's happened.
Yeah.
4 people are desperately ill. Obviously, it's mushroom poison. They know that from fairly early on. They've got a whole team of people. They've got council people, and they've got all the public health officials, as you said, all out there desperately trying to make sure as fast as possible that there isn't a greater public risk. Massive amount of money and time spent, completely wasted. So yeah, it's an interesting component of this case. The officials reacted quickly and very diligently to eliminate that risk. And I think from memory, I may have this wrong, I think they kicked off pretty much day one, and they delivered their report, I think on the 11th of August it was, saying that there is no public health risk. But, that's a truckload of time, money, and energy, and a lot of people working long hours because they just want to make sure that they can get on top of a problem if there is one. But as we found in this case, there wasn't a problem at all.
And she said initially she got them from Woolworths.
Yeah, you can see when you look through the evidence, you can see how she's decided her story very early on and just keeps repeating and repeating and repeating. So by the time the cops get round to interview, that story is looking a bit wobbly. And there's the notion that death cap mushrooms, for example, might have grown commercially somewhere. You've got to eliminate that horrible possibility.
You do. Now, I want to
Yes,
ask your opinion
yes.
on this. When Erin left hospital after 5 minutes, what do you think she was doing for that 2 hours or so?
I've had a look through the evidence, and whilst there is some cell tower evidence, I think in the trial, because there's a lot of very technical evidence, it's hard to pin exactly what she was doing. I just don't know at this point, but I think we may get a bit more clarity later on. I think the cell tower evidence, from memory, at one stage connected to Outram, which is about 15 k's away, I suppose. I may have that wrong from where in Gather, but it's not completely clear that she had to have been there for it to happen. Since this cell tower evidence is incredibly complicated and it's not definitive, unfortunately. So I don't know. She said she had a bit to do, look after the dogs, make sure her kids were looked after, all that sort of stuff. So I don't know. And it's like in a lot of these cases, the only person we know, the only person who actually has the story and knows it inside out is Erin. And like with a lot of people charged and convicted of these horrible crimes, they get to write their own version of the story because there's no one else left to tell it.
Well, she thought
I'd
so.
love to know.
Yes, well, except Ian, and he's so dignified, and the fact that he survived, she was not betting on that.
No, you just can't. I've looked at some of those, no doubt. Have you looked at some of the literature on these things? And there are a lot of variables that come into play that for the experts, dosage, age, or condition, that sort of stuff. So much coming into it. I just think on the day she put those Beef Wellingtons down, she intended to kill everybody. And the fact that Ian was just fortunate to survive.
And the
nothing
thing
short of
is,
miracle, nothing you could anticipate.
they were so unwell, those poor people, and it was a terrible, terrible death. It's just something you couldn't have ever anticipated.
No, and what strikes me with this case is that the jury have found that she knew what she was doing and she intended to do it. And she sat there, fed them this stuff, knowing full well what the outcome will be. If they survive, and if they don't survive, it is a slow and lingering death. And it is utterly horrible. And there's plenty of literature, and there are also plenty of other Australian and overseas cases that I've read about that are in the papers about the effect. I mean, there's a chap back in Canberra, I think back in the Christmas of 2012, foraged, served it up to his mates for a special dinner. He was a Chinese chef in one of the clubs down there, and he and one of his mates died.
Oh, no.
You can't predict it. There was that case last year, 2024, in Melbourne. An elderly Italian woman, had been foraging mushrooms in her front yard for a while. And, she'd eaten a couple and thought they were okay, so it's fine. And then she found a few more, so she knocks up dinner for she and her son who was living with her. She died and he survived. And that's last year. So
Wow.
there was there's plenty of evidence around, and you have a look at Google to see what news reports of these things, and there are plenty of them around. So, there are no great surprises when
No.
you get mushroom.
Okay, so what were you surprised by?
Nothing was actually well, the thing that always surprises me is the two faces of Erin, or maybe more than two. And what fascinates me is the public facade that she had, the caring mother, very quiet, just goes about her business, not intrusive. And then we see her online life with some of the Facebook messages, which are quite spicy, I have to say. So there are obviously two different Erin Pattersons operating. Now, there have been about her former people that she was working with when she was an air traffic controller are now coming forward with stories. Some of those might be legit. Some of those might be a bit stirred up. a lot of people will have Erin's stories. Some of them may not be as accurate as they could be, but we're definitely seeing a person, two different people in Erin Patterson. That the other thing that always gets me with this too is just her comments about her parents, and I just find that really strange. Yeah, it's nothing that's really shocked me about this story aside from the horrible crime. But as I go through it, there's nothing really startling about it apart from the sheer ordinariness of their life and this extraordinary thing that happened, which is just so damaging, so brutal, so devastating.
Mm.
So it's that juxtaposition that I find really just horrific for the family. It's just like you can't get past it.
Oh, yeah. Well, hopefully they'll have a little bit of peace from the conviction.
Yeah, I think the conviction. I mean, and I don't know. I can't. Don't know what they were thinking, but I remember I was down in Morwell I was down there a couple of times. Down there day one, a couple of days, and I went back down on the day before the jury came back, and I'm thinking, it's the jury have been out 6 days. It's a trial that was supposed to run 4 to 6 weeks. It's gone just on 11. The stress on everyone involved is massive, but more so on that poor family that has to endure it day in, day out without a result. When you get to the Monday morning, and I think you and I spoke about this a while ago, I'm scratching my head thinking the judge has got to possibly bring them out just to see how they're going. So when they came back in that afternoon with a decision, the stress on the family must be utterly extraordinary. But to hear them come down as definitively, they didn't say guilty, 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 guilty. A relief from the family. Maybe they can start trying to get at least some finality for them. But, they've still got to go through the sentencing process. And should she decide to appeal through the appellate process, but at least the jury have done their job and they've delivered some finality. As I think it's some people are saying, she might appeal. Well, the jury's decision isn't a provisional decision; it's a definitive decision. If something else happens down the track, fair enough. But the jury have made their decision, and that's the one we run with. Now it's up to
I've got a couple of questions.
how long.
I was just going to say with Erin, we are talking earlier about the psych tests. Can she refuse to have them?
Yeah, I'm not completely sure on this, but I think she can decline to have them. Sure. Now she has choice. She can't be forced into a psychological report. And I suppose on the flip side of that, if you're forced into a psychological report, it probably wouldn't be worth it anyway. But I think that's up to her, and that it might be the case, and it's hypothetical, it might be that the defense will have her, or not defense anymore, her lawyers will have her examined, and there might be another expert from the government also to see whether it's a contrary view. Happens quite a lot in court cases. One side will say one thing, the other side will say a different thing. Sometimes they meet in the middle. So, yeah, I think the option to have that psychiatric or psychological testing will be ultimately she's got to agree to it. So, yeah, that's how that pans out. There's been no suggestion at all through this case. I was just going through it this afternoon. There's the only suggestions of any mental illness in the case that I've been able to recall is in evidence of Simon Patterson a couple of weeks back. But it's not mental illness that precludes her knowing what she's doing, knowing what she did, and being able to properly instruct her lawyers. So, be interesting to see what the psychs have to say, I've got to tell you. Because a lot of people had their 2 bombs worth on this, but let's see what the professionals have to say after they've examined her.
I'll tell you one thing, her counsel would have had a lot of feedback from her before, during and after. She would have been very hands-on.
Yes, I think there's a person who was very much involved in her own defence, and you see them. Sometimes people I've been doing defences, they're moderately passive, but other times they are. Trial finishes at 4 in the afternoon. They go back to their cell and they're into it again until lights out time. I mean, Roger Rogerson, when I covered his trial all those years ago, would cover every bloody full stop, every comma, and he had advice on everything. Late night finish, early morning go. Yeah, in part, one of the reasons and I'm not suggesting in the Patterson case it's the case, but one of the reasons the lawyers can look so exhausted is having to get all that advice from their clients and also do their own work. I did an observation last day of the trial when I was down there and the jury, waiting for the jury to come back. All the key players just looked so bloody exhausted.
Although Dr. Rogers always looked quite perky going into court, and she'd have the coloured tights on, So she looked okay, but I thought, yes, Mr. Mandy, Colin Mandy, obviously, Erin's. Why did I say doctor? Barrister, he looked exhausted, in my opinion.
Yeah. Oh, no, I agree with you. I looked at them and thinking, and the cops as well, because the cops are also not only they've got to give evidence and all that sort of stuff. It's their case, and they've got to be available. They've also coppers are very hands on and try to make sure the families are looked after properly as well.
Yeah.
There's a bit of pastoral care when you're a detective. So, yeah, yeah, I just looked at them and thought, you poor buggers. Everyone here looks tired. I mean, and just doing criminal defense, you're up at dawn,
Yeah.
if not earlier. And it's not unusual to see midnight, and then you've got to grab a couple of hours and back up again, trying to be on top of your game. And that's everybody involved.
And they might have had to hide from each other at that hotel that the jury was in.
Yes, that was there. It didn't go quite according to plan.
But that's what happens
I've
when
got
you
a rough
have to do
idea.
it in a small town, That's what happened.
And then as you go, going back to what you were saying earlier too about this case is just a little bit more than the average. Not an average case in any way, shape,
No.
or form, but uplifting a massive criminal trial that would not stretch resources in the city, but the resources in the city are there to deal with it, and taking it to a country town that isn't set up for this sort of stuff. The logistics alone of running a criminal trial are challenging enough when you're doing it day in, day out. But if you've got to take a couple of $100 Ks out of Melbourne into a town that's not set up to do it, a lot of work. So yeah, things are bound to have happened. It's fortunate that the court staff have been dealing with this sort of stuff for years, so in case of the lawyers and the coppers knowing when to duck for cover and say, hey, there's a problem.
Yeah.
The last thing you want is last thing you want in a criminal trial is anything that could suggest that there might be an issue. So
Yeah.
they handle it well. Shouldn't have happened, but accidents do happen. Given the logistics constraints of this, the trial went very smoothly. I've got to say, by the way, it's just one of those. It worked well, but gee whiz, it was hard work for all those people involved.
Oh, exactly. And the families involved.
Oh yeah, ultimately, you've got to make sure that justice is done, the trial is scrupulously fair, and that the poor old victims are not forgotten. They've got to be looked after.
Absolutely, they do. And I just think every day when you would see Ian with his takeaway coffee cup walking into court, he's very dignified, very calm.
Yeah, yeah. And just imagine, the innocence of these people, living simple lives, great lives of community service, honourable, decent people, and then just this one extraordinary moment where everything just gets blown to pieces. So
Now, I just want to forward here before we get cut off in this conversation. And I just wanted you to tell us a bit about Recipe for Murder and how people have to pre-order now. Pre-orders are very important.
Pre-order now is lovely. I was approached by my publisher back in, October, November of 2023, around about the time of the arrest. So the first beginning of a number. She said, this is an extraordinary story. Do you want to do a book about it? And I said, shit, yeah. Because it had caught everyone. It had caught her. It caught her people she worked with. This wide demographic of people. I was fascinated. So I agreed to do it. And then that's when I started looking at it. Then I started digging, visiting, having a look around. Doing the basic things you've got to do to tell a story. Go down, have a look. And it's utterly fascinating. It's a challenging story to write because it's sort of so much has been happening, particularly, and there's a bit more to come, I suspect. But it's. I swore that after writing a book on Roger Rogerson during a live trial that I'd never do a live trial book again. But some stories you just can't walk away from, and this is one of them.
That's what we would think.
Mid-October.
Is it?
Exactly. Mid-October it's due out through the lovely people at Hachette.
All right, that sounds cool.
So I was lucky to be pretty much in front of it before the trial started. So there are a lot of words before we got to Morwell.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally know what you're saying. But also, I think Erin will end up back down in Melbourne, won't she, for the sentencing, or they may go to Morwell?
Yeah. Look, I was thinking about that the other day. I think it's more likely that the sentencing will be in Melbourne unless there's some profoundly good reason to go back to Morwell. I don't I think Melbourne would be the logical place for the sentencing, to be honest. Yeah, I don't think Melbourne will have Erin's presence again. I could, of course, be completely wrong, but I think it's just logistically sensible now. The trial is over and done with. The sentencing is in Melbourne. And if they're going to call experts and that sort of stuff, they'll probably be all Melbourne-based as well. So, if the family are content to go to Melbourne, which I suspect they will be, then that's where it'll be.
Be so interesting. Well, thank you so much for your time. Make sure you all pre-order Recipe for Murder. I've had a look at it. It's on all the book sites, ready to pre-order. So make sure you get it. And thank you, Duncan.
Lisa, thank you, sir. It's a fascinating case. We've been through it. You and I have been chatting about this for a while. It's absolutely horrific, devastating, but my goodness, it's captured the world's attention.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got to feel for the families who have to live in this international story.
Yeah, just average people all of a sudden finding minute details of their lives everywhere. Your posts at times of London, the Independent, everywhere. And there's a lot of, there'll be more coming up with. I think there are some drama series and so on, books and so on. So it's not over yet, and I think there will be refreshed media coverage when we get a sentencing date. Now, we won't know about that for a while either, but sometime this year.
Yes, I need to know because I've got to book my flights and get ready. It takes a lot of organising when you're reporting on it.
It does. The logistic, and great credit to the Victorian Supreme Court media people who did a fantastic job dealing with over 200, I think. Yeah, massive media back. And the weird thing about this case, is how much media was there throughout the entire thing. In fact, I think the grew as the case went on.
And that's unusual these days, isn't it?
Yeah, well, and the public interest grew as well. Yeah, day one, there are a few public down there, but both media and public interest grew when the word came that the judgment was going to come in at 2:15. There would have been about 60 people outside the courtroom trying to get into 48 seats. Good luck with that. People coming from far and wide. It's anyway. So,
all right. Well, I'm going to let you go because we're up to 37 minutes. So thank you so much, Duncan.
Yeah.
So let's see what happens. But thank you for that, Duncan. And I'll chat to you really soon. Hopefully we'll get a date for the sentencing relatively soon. Okay, that'd be fabulous. Thank you. I have to start thinking. All right. Appreciate your help.
Well, okay.
You too. Bye.